Hi friends, I'm here with nephew Braxton, and we are working on, we're going to make a mushroom growing chamber in a nice cabinet. So we've got this cabinet that I picked up at the Habitat for Humanity ReStore for 15 bucks. And this will be big enough to grow a couple of fruiting blocks at a time. So I also got a ultrasonic humidifier at Goodwill for 5 bucks. So the things that we're going to need for mushroom growing, we need humidity, we need airflow. This humidifier, as long as it's turned on, the fan is blowing air constantly. Yeah, so when it's turned on, if it's turned all the way up, there's a lot of humidity coming out. If you turn it all the way down, there's very little humidity coming out, but the fan is still blowing the same. So that's going to supply our fresh air as well as our humidity, and we'll be able to adjust it to get the right amount of humidity. We also need light. So I got this pair of grow lights online. Two of these were 10 bucks. We want to be able to see what's going on, and this doesn't have a glass door. So I went to Goodwill and got a $1 picture frame that we'll get the glass out of, and we'll use this. So Braxton and I have been discussing the challenges of how we're going to do this. And the biggest challenge is to have a super high humidity environment inside of this cabinet without destroying the cabinet. It'll get destroyed if we don't really weatherproof it. But that's going to be our next step. We'll come up with a plan of action, and then we're going to step by step go through with you how we do this. And I think I can safely say that we're going to make a really killer mushroom growing cabinet that's going to look super cool, and it's going to be very functional.
It's going to be pretty cheap.
And it's going to be pretty cheap. Well, here's what we ended up with, just to show you before we show you how we got there. It's a little more involved than we expected it to be. We learned some lessons along the way, but we ended up with a great grow cabinet. And now let's go back again and see how we got here. Let's start by looking at this door. Instead of traditional hinges on this door, they've got holes in the door, and then on the bottom they've got a plastic post mounted to the cabinet that fits up into the hole in the bottom of the door, and in the top it's got a hole through the cabinet with a metal rod that goes down through it and into the hole in the door, which works great. It's a simple design, but that hole into that MDF on the door is going to let moisture in. So we're going to have to do something about that. So I went back to the Habitat for Humanity ReStore and just looked through all their parts, and I found they had a big bag of these nylon cylinders. If I hadn't found these things that honestly they gave me free because I only wanted a few of them, but if I hadn't found them, I could have just filled the holes with epoxy and then gone back after the epoxy dried and drilled holes in that. All right, so one of the things we're going to want on this cabinet is this door is a solid door, but we're going to want to be able to see what's going on inside of there. It's not much fun to grow something inside of a closed box. So in order to see what's inside of there, we are going to put a glass window inside of it. We'll drill a couple holes to get the jigsaw started, and on the jigsaw we want to make sure we're using a nice clean sharp blade and set the oscillation to 0 so it doesn't chip out. So we're testing right now the rabbit bit that's on this router We want to make sure it's cutting deep enough for the glass to just sit down below flat. And I think that's about right. And we'll clean up the corners with an oscillating saw. All right, we've had to do some adjustment on some of the corners and stuff, but it goes in now, fits nice and flush. So that's ready to go in, and that'll get caulked in place, and we'll wait on that. We'll do that probably last, but that's going to look nice. It's going to look great. So we'll mix up some epoxy and get those nylon cylinders in place and start sealing things up. Now let's start figuring out how we're going to do ventilation and humidity. We're going with 1.5-inch drain pipe, like a sink drain pipe that's made to fit inside of 1.5-inch PVC. And we're going to drill holes, and then we're going to put this 1.5-inch drain pipe through the hole and epoxy it in place. And that'll do two things. It'll protect that medium density fiberboard inside there, and it'll also let us attach things to it on the outside of the cabinet. You'll see. So we've got a hole in the front top on one side where air and humidity are going to be coming in. And then we put a hole on the opposite side at the front, down low on one side, so that the air comes in at the top on one side of the front and then travels down diagonally and exhausts down on the opposite side, still at the front. Now we want to get the grow lights attached at the top, and to do that, instead of screwing them in place, we're just going to use a good high quality clear silicone. And while we're using that silicone, we're going to seal all the way around all the edges of those lights and where the wires go in, just to make sure that it's really waterproof. They're not intended to be fully waterproof, but we want to make them waterproof while we're installing them. And we're going to need an extra hole in the cabinet to get the light wire out, so we have the controller outside and so that we can plug it in. Like with other holes through the cabinet, we have to do something to seal and protect that inner part of the cabinet after we get it in there. We've got to do a pretty big hole in this case to be able to get that controller through it. But once that controller is through, it only needs to be the size of a wire. So what I decided to do was use a PVC cap that I found, and I'm going to drill a hole in it that's big enough for the wire itself to go through. And then I'm going to split it in half so that after I get that controller out through the hole, I can take the two halves of that cap, put them back together, and use them to plug that hole. And then we'll epoxy it in place. All right, we've got several things to epoxy now, so we've made up a good bit of epoxy, and we're going to start by attaching a fitting onto the top of our humidifier. And this is just a fitting that's used to attach a P-trap to the drain tailpipe on a sink. And so it's the right size for a 1.5-inch piece to fit into. Next, we'll epoxy in the exhaust piece where the air is going to be coming out of the cabinet, and the place on the top of the cabinet where the fresh air and humidity are going to be coming in. And now we'll seal up the hole for the light wires. We'll lay a bead of silicone where the glass is going to rest. And then some more silicone to seal it in all the way around. And now we're just going to go through the whole inside of this cabinet and caulk all the corner seams and anywhere it could be a place where moisture might get into the wood. We've attached a length of 1.5-inch hot tub drain, and we've got things plugged in now. Let's turn those lights on. Beautiful. Gorgeous. Yep, and then got the tubing attached. Let's turn that on and crank it up high and see what we get.
Yeah, there it is, just coming
up. Oh yeah, looking good. And the other thing is, actually now you can see that moisture is blowing out that exhaust. So our last things to do are to cover the exhaust, and we can either use micropore paper tape on it or we can use polyfill, and then we're going to put some weather stripping around that door so that the air and moisture don't come out around there like they're doing right now. I got some weather stripping from the Habitat for Humanity Restore that we're going to use to seal around this door, but then I had a better idea. White duct tape over the edges of the door, put on so that instead of being flat against the edges, it bows out, and then it'll just deform when you close the door and it'll seal the gap. Now to seal the ventilation exhaust, I'm just going to stuff a wad of polyfill in. Polyfill is that puffy polyester stuff that's used to stuff pillows or stuffed animal toys, that kind of thing. You could also just tape over it with micropore paper tape. We got it in place, got it set up and running, put in a couple of our DIY grow-at-home mushroom kits, and things initially looked pretty good. Everything was working the way we intended it to. But it turns out that even the lowest humidity setting on that humidifier is too much for 1.5 cubic feet of space. The whole inside of the cabinet was coated with moisture, and it just kept getting worse and worse and worse. And so at that point, my thinking was, well, maybe if we only run it half time. So I went and dug out a timer and plugged it into a timer so it would run for half an hour and be off for half an hour. But that didn't really work because in the half hour it was off. The fan on the humidifier was off too, so there was no fresh air going in to dry out the inside. So what we decided is we're going to have a constant airflow going that's separate from the humidifier. So what we're doing now is we're putting a splitter onto our ventilation so that the straight part is always going to be blowing in. I scavenged a 40 millimeter USB fan. So I've got a 40 millimeter fan now that'll provide constant ventilation. And I also found this old humidity controller. These are pretty cheap. You can get them for like 12 or 15 bucks. And it comes with sensors. We will just run those in through this ventilation outlet. So we'll set up this Y fitting so that the USB fan is continuously blowing air in, and then as needed, the humidifier will kick on and add humidity to that air. That brings us back to now. We're working great. I've had to make some adjustments to the humidity controls. I found that if I did what I thought I would do, which is have it kick the humidifier on until the humidity gets up to 90 and then turn off till it gets down to 85 and then back on again, that cycle was leaving things a little bit wet inside, and that can lead to bacterial blotch on your mushroom. So I've adjusted it now to where it kicks on at 75% and then kicks off at 90, and that gives it a chance to really dry out before the humidifier kicks on again. But it's working great as intended. Everything about it is spectacular. I like the way it looks. If I was going to do it again, which I will, I would tighten up some things as far as having exposed wires. But in general, pretty great project.